And may the blessings of life find in each of you an open door that your magnificent divinity, your whole wonderful spiritual self, may come forth increasing in measure in a way that there is not anything in this world. There is not anything in this world. No human condition, no appearance, no other person can ever close that door. Such are the great words of Jesus the Christ. When God spoke through him, I am an open door that no man can shut. But taking that more deeply into your awareness and all that you have been studying as you awaken with the realization, as you have studied and you realize, I am is the name of God. I am is God in action. I am is the name of my own individualized self. And I am is the means that I use to identify everything that I am doing, everywhere that I am going. Therefore, I conclude rightfully, it's more than I am an open door that no man can shut. It's that I am is the open door. And once that door is open, the human consciousness that has been saddled and limited by the duality of beliefs, perceptions, and more, begins to be less and less and less, and your beautiful divine minds begin to express through your mental bodies once more. A gracious good evening. I am Akasha. I am grateful to your presence here. Today, there are record numbers of individuals around the world who are entering the great awakening of the ages. And I again will say to you, precious hearts, it makes no difference if your awakening began 20 years ago or 2 minutes ago. I assure you that if there is an ounce of interest in you, in things of a spiritual interest, and that single ounce is actually supported by having almost zero interest in things of a religious nature, then your time of awakening is something that you chose yourself before you were born into this embodiment. And I love to remind you that you will give yourself a little more credit, that you will be kinder and more gentle on yourself. No one awakens in one lifetime. It has never been done, and it never will be until there are those who fulfill Jesus' prophecies. They're the untouchables. They're the ones that will walk on earth. They will have a super consciousness. They will display superpowers. And if necessary, produce the kind of shock and awe that obviously the mass of the people who won't awaken require to begin their own awakening. Yet for all of you, I encourage you to remind yourself that your awakening has most likely been ongoing in the current scenario over the last 3,000 years. And in those years, you've taken steps. You've analyzed when you've left your bodies and returned to the planes of bliss where people live in between lifetimes. You've analyzed your lifetimes on earth. You've spoken with your guardian angels. You've met with great masters who are sponsoring your awakening. You've seen the things you've accomplished, the things you overcome in past lives, and you've seen what yet is required in order to once again trigger your great awakening. The reason it is so difficult to awaken in a short period of time is because of the organizations in the world that have come together, whether they be governments, corporations, communities, religions, all who participate in supporting into the consciousness of the people the belief in the book of knowledge of good and evil. And it's that belief perpetuated in congregations of scientific academy, in congregations of religious beliefs. It is that belief in the tree of knowledge of good and evil which is amplified in the presence of fear that has entered your consciousness, your mental body, lifetime after lifetime. We see that the average citizen on earth has lived 700 lifetimes since you all arrived on the earth almost 15 million years ago. We also know that in the first 2 million years, you were divine offsprings. You were on the earth, you were outpicturings of your beautiful spiritual self. You had acquired physical bodies for yourself. And in the first 2 million years, you all worked with the presence of those other beings that were on the earth. Angels were here, visible and tangible. The elemental beings, they were here. Those are the beings that you only hear about in fairy tale, legend, and lore. They were here. And all together, they were helping you and they were teaching you as each of you acquired beautiful new physical bodies for yourself because you were spiritual beings. You came as a creator race, not from another place in the physical universe. You didn't come from a physical star, a physical planet. You came from the center of the universe, a place we call the great central sun. And this is where all the forces of God, Goddess, all that is, exist. These are where the primal qualities of the masculine force of life, the feminine force of life exists. This too is where the individualization of divine mind exists. That is what you hear in religion as the Heavenly Father. Yet too, in the great central sun is the individualization of the Sacred Heart, the Sacred Soul, and that's the Heavenly Mother. And that's where you were all born, as a magnificent creator race, born of the infinite I Am Presence of life, endowed with all the qualities of divine mind and divine heart, the Father and the Mother, sent forth as individualizations of themselves, divine replications that could go forth, make your own decisions, and carry on in the evolution of this universe. There are thousands of creator races throughout the universe. There are hundreds of millions of species and races that are not creator races. They are born from other planets and certain qualities, but you are a creator race. For a long time, an ancient group of beings known as the Great White Brotherhood, the mystical beings of the Far East, or those beings who today's language are simply known as the Ascended Masters. The ancient term, the Great White Brotherhood, was changed because of the growing prejudice and the realization that the Great White Brotherhood is not about a bunch of white-colored men. It's about the beautiful white light that comes from their soul, that comes from their divinity. But seeing that humankind was on a course of hatred, and the manifestation of that hatred, it is the worst. It is the worst evil. It is prejudice. The Great White Brotherhood decided to change their names and simply call them what they are. They are ascended beings, ascended masters, so they are simply known as the Ascended Host. And I might as well add now, tomorrow, the fourth Thursday of May, is the beginning of the 7 sacred weeks, in which twice a year, in May, and then upon the Thursday Thanksgiving in America, 7 sacred weeks begin. And from the Ascended Master realms, from the 5th up to the 7th dimension, the Ascended Masters, uncountable legions of angels, and in stratospheres that are even higher, not only of your system of worlds, but other systems of worlds, such as the Orion system, the Arcturian system, and then we don't have to go so far. We can think about the system of which your solar system is a part, and that's the Pleiadian system. And all these systems and all these worlds are higher dimensional realities, higher atmospheric realities, higher interdimensional realities that share the same surface of a planet, but each stratospheric reality is in a higher vibration. And once you get into a 5th dimensional higher vibration, only perfection exists. So we begin 7 sacred weeks. And from these mystical beings, from the Ascended Host, is a tremendous outpouring of light. Of course, more than 99% of humanity do not experience directly the tremendous blessings of the Ascended Host, because the mass of the people do not even know the Ascended Host exists. To the mass of the people, they are either atheist or they believe in one. Maybe Allah, maybe Buddha, maybe Abraham, maybe Jesus. The mass of the people do not know that every planet that is alive and active, and every star in our universal hierarchy, have not only beings that live on the surface and the dimension that belongs to the surface, like your planet where you live, the 3rd dimension. All active planets and stars have higher dimensions, but they share the same surface reality. Can you comprehend that? One of your greatest scientists amongst you comprehended it perfectly. His name was Dr. Stephen Hawking. A student once asking the doctor, can you try to give us something, a metaphor, something that we can grasp this idea of interdimensional realities, realities that actually coexist together, but each one at a higher vibration? So Dr. Hawkins, as you know, who's not as mobile as the students are, sent a student down to the cafeteria and asked the student to bring forth a stack of paper cups. and place the cups on the table. So he said, you see the base, we have maybe 25 paper cups, and they're all in a stack here. Yet the base, they all occupy the same space, albeit they are getting a little higher and higher, but the base foundation is the same. So the basics of what even Dr. Hawkins is teaching, the theory of everything, is such an open door for the scientific community that is not honoring him as much as he could be honored. But many of the people in the world are pressuring them to honor Dr. Hawkins with his realization. And at another time when a student asked him, Dr. Hawkins, clearly you have a scientific, you have a mathematical mind. You have written, your research has taken you further than the majority of scientists in the last 100 years. Is it possible, Dr. Hawkins, that your scientific and mathematical mind, that you might have a spiritual side to you? Dr. Hawkins gave off a laughter and said, I could not have gotten this far, evolving my mind, my science, my formulas, without knowing first that I am a spiritual being. And I have been silently in quest of that, knowing that the scientific community that I support, that they would cast me off even more if they knew of my strong spiritual side. Isn't that wonderful? And yet, we are faced with the truth. We are faced with the truth that the mass of the people, their emotional bodies, are gripped in so much fear. And that fear in the emotional body is what holds their beliefs, their perceptions, and limited thinking in place. It's the fear in the emotional body that even keeps many in the people unable to move from the negative aspect of the duality aspect of negative thinking into more of the duality aspect of positive thinking. So in the Ascended Master teachings, we come to realize, we often contemplate some of the statements of Jesus because we know why he made them. And of this duality of concepts of negative and positive and good and bad. And what solidifies it? What solidifies it? It's those who have controlled the world that will do everything to convince you that you are a sinner, that you've done wrong. The creation, the anchoring of fear. So these are all the pieces that hold it, that duality, in place. As was said, as we have just come from Salt Lake City this past weekend, there have been students who've come out to a beautiful weekend and they'll try the Friday night. And sometimes on the end of the Friday evening, they'll say to the messenger, you know, I just loved everything that I heard, but I can't stay for the weekend. This is new to me and I love what you said or the masters spoke through you, but I'm just so afraid. I don't even like my church, but it has such a grip on me and they've put so much fear in me. I'm afraid to search any further. And I just say that because that you'll realize the depth that human beings are in that how are you going to wake up the mass of the people who have all sorts of varied beliefs, and then they have emotional bodies that are charred, that are filled with fear, in which there's all sorts of loss and tragedy and hurts that come with duality. How do you wake those people up? I'm talking about the people that really think that you're odd. You're the wild one in the family. You're the black sheep. And they just won't. A lot of them they'll honor what you do, just don't talk about it. Well, what is it going to do to, obviously they haven't had the number of lifetimes. If you're interested, as I said, in an ounce of spirituality, that can't happen if you've had without you having a series of past life embodiments in which you've been working. You've been working to awaken yourself, reclaim the lost will, take back the sovereignty that you gave other people and systems in this world, and really begin to rebuild a sense of will, a sense of purpose, and a sense of sovereignty. Because knowing that in this particular time there would be a lot of deceit on the planet. There would be all sorts of things. There would be a huge New Age community just filled with prophets that will just false prophets. And they're willing to do the same thing that's been occurring for the last 10 million years. Tell you things, you accept those things, you give your whole life to them, and years pass by and you're an elder and you found out that everything they told you is not true. Those spaceships that some command told you were going to land on the earth to rescue you, none of it was true. And so you know in this embodiment you have to search and search until you find a path that's going to nurture you. A path in which your teachers are not interested in anything in your personal life. A path in which your teachers know that if you apply the teachings, the truth, your personal life is going to improve. Your personal life is going to get better. You're going to have a sense of peace and happiness that's just going to grow to the point that people that are your friends or associates in the world might even start asking you, what's with you? How come you don't worry like everybody else? How come your face isn't full of pain and stress like the rest of us in this office tower? Why are you different? And of course you really have to think about how you're going to answer that question. Are you to give them the full blast, or are you just going to say, well, I try to live a happy, harmonious life? So the point that I'm moving this, those citizens around the world who are awakening, they're finding the spiritual paths that will help them, that will facilitate them, that they can study. Those individuals have been going at their awakening for over 3,000 years. The people on the earth that just won't waken, well, there is something wonderful, and that's that their hearts are starting to change. There's more conscience in the people today, even though they may not be awake. But what is it going to take to awaken people who haven't had several lifetimes preparing to be awake? You've heard the term presented in your world by an American president. I'm not saying anything about the president, I'm just saying the term, shock and awe. That's what it's going to take. And Jesus knew that. And of course, Jesus was the first to trigger the awakening upon the planet. And then over the next 2,000 years, to overlight those who were interested in what he had to say, who would study what he had to say, because he knew those are the ones that will fulfill everything he said. And I keep putting it before you, dear hearts, because it's the truth. In the three grand statements that Jesus made, if you look in the New Testament, it said one way. If you look in the Nag Hammadi scrolls, which were found in the previous century, it said slightly a different way. If you could access in Turkey, if you could access the 1/3 of the scrolls of Jesus' life, because before Jesus ascended, he had already arranged that his life would be written about. There were the scribes, and 2 of the disciples were commissioned to write everything down. And upon Jesus' ascension, knowing the cover-ups that would come, the darkness that would enter the church, Jesus separated all the recordings of his life and sent them in 3 areas. And the one area where the ancient scrolls haven't been corrupted, haven't been covered up, are the scrolls that were taken by the disciple James over to the lands of Turkey. Today, the Greek Orthodox hierarchy holds that 1/3 of the ancient scrolls. And I assure you, precious hearts, they have fought off attack after attack, not only by the Jesuits, but even by 3 popes that have done everything to try to get those scrolls out of the Greek hierarchy and over to the Vatican so that they can bury them, because they have too much information. Information that the Vatican in the year 325 cut out of what became the New Testament. So in 3 places, Jesus said in slightly a different way that those who come after me, there will be those who come after me. They will inherit the earth. They will have powers the earth has not seen. Every hand that is raised against them will fail. And I call them the untouchables, because no harm can come unto those ones. Jesus was speaking of those who over the centuries from the time of his ascension 2,000 years ago would try to cling to the light, search for truth, study his words, lifetime after lifetime. And then, when the 7th golden age would begin, their time of preparing, of their final preparations, would begin. Of course, the 7th golden age started in December 2012, and you are a couple of years into it. And so now, the final preparations for those ones who, Jesus said, and I call them the untouchables, the preparations have begun. I put forth, I hope and I trust that those ones are each of you, as well as students on other spiritual paths as well, that you are those ones that are finishing your training, will raise yourself up and out of the limited consciousness of duality, begin to experience your higher superconsciousness, your higher discerning intelligence. Empty your minds, empty your emotional body of the history of all corrupt beliefs and limitations and perceptions. Heal the emotional body of all the hurts and all the wounds, and mostly the fear that has corrupted the human emotional body. Discover the sacred fire, use the sacred fire every day. And that's what our students do. For the first 17 years that we made contact with you, a big focus of our teachings. As you awakened and discovered the greatest aspect of your being is not here in this world, that the greatest aspect of your spiritual self lives up with the angels and the ascended masters. And that aspect is called the individualized Ayah Presence. And as you discovered this, that this Ayah Presence stands above you, maybe 12 to 50 feet above you, but remember that stack of cups. As your spiritual self is exactly as shown in the chart, above the earthly self. As your spiritual self lives up in the higher realms. There's the life force between your higher I am presence and the outer self. And you see the life force passing down through the pineal gland, anchoring into the heart. And in ages past, and the occult laws that governed your planet, that life force was programmed. It was programmed to give you life 70 years and 10. That's 70 years. And if you lived your life very harmoniously, you might get even a few more. You lived your life destructively, you wouldn't make it to even to 70. So this is the history that you've been evolving through. And of course, the wonderful news that you heard a few years ago is that the great ascended master known as Saint Germain, that he used his authority and he removed the oldest occult law because of those who are awakening on the earth at this time. And that occult law was the human physical body must age. It must only be allowed to live 70 years. And then people must leave their bodies, go up to the plains of bliss, and come back in. So what does that one thing tell you? And are you ready to clear your consciousness for eternity? Are you ready to spread the word regardless of what people say to you? The most important message just from that piece I gave you: there is no death. It never existed, and never has. You just wear out physical bodies, and once you've worn them out, you leave your bodies in what is called the change called death. Your life force leaves your body. You step into your light body, you go back to the plains of bliss. You don't carry any of the density of the world. You are free for a while, and in the plains of bliss, you sleep, you rest, and if you're at all awakened, you start to plan out your next life. You also meet up with loved ones if they're still on the other side. Now note that I said, and if you're at all slightly awakened, you'll start to plan your next life. Now why did I say that? Because today, still 74% of people who lose their body through disease, through killing, through accidents, they return to the plains of bliss. They must go into the sleep. As soon as they awake and they know there's an opportunity to reincarnate, to re-embody, they will do it. And they will, and this is where it gets a little difficult to explain to you, they will naturally attract themselves to people or the state of consciousness that they were in when they left the earth. Did that make sense? And that is addiction. The mass of the people are addicted to embodiment, reincarnation. They come back without any thinking, any planning. And because of that, they generally come back into the same state that they were in previous embodiment. As difficult as it is to hear, those who live and suffer in third world countries, when they lose their body, and as soon as they have a chance to reincarnate, they will look for that state of existence to be born into, because it's the only one they know. Their consciousness will just attract to that. But let's go back to what's important. You are all on that path. You're awakening. You're in preparations. You're in these opening years of the seventh golden age to finish your studies, raise yourself, and know there's a spiritual hierarchy on the other side, and any effort that you make to raise yourself into that higher consciousness, you're going to be met by your spiritual elders. You're going to be met by angels and ascended beings. The more you reach your hand up for help, the more some being up there is going to take your hand and start pulling you magnetically, start expanding your consciousness, and all of these things. But what about the mass of the people who haven't awakened over the last 3,000 years? How will they awaken? I told you how. Shock and awe. Who's going to produce the shock and awe? You are. This is where the future gets so exciting. Your earth has the records of one individual who got through the seeming glass ceiling to the higher consciousness, studied that, embodied that higher consciousness. Yeshu ben Joseph, known as Jesus the Christ. And he studied from the time he was 12 until he was 22 for 10 years. And when he studied, he didn't have angels and ascended beings invisible to him. No, he found entrance to the greatest school on this planet, the Himalayan Mystery School. And there, ascended masters came in and taught him the laws of life. He practiced, he studied, he meditated. He broke the glass ceiling. And then he made himself an instrument. He made his mind, his body, his feelings an instrument for this higher Christ consciousness. And as that greater consciousness grew in measure, his human consciousness, the consciousness that knew duality, it just stepped aside. Stepped aside. Jesus was channeling the greatest force in the universe, but he wasn't channeling a force outside of himself. With the help of angels and ascended masters, Jesus made contact with his God self, and then studied and applied and meditated to embody his God self and bring more of its light down into his earthly self. At the completion of his 10 years of study, at the age of 22, Jesus went off to practice because he knew his ministry would begin when he would return to Judea. He went off to practice everything he studied. From the Himalayas, he came down, passed around to Nepal, and then came down through Tibet and into India. He was loved by the people of India, produced many healings. Sometimes the healings worked and sometimes they didn't. That's why Jesus was practicing. He also knew the art of teleportation. He knew how to move beyond space and time, space travel, distance. He had one group of people before his ministry that he had to contact. As you know from the Ascended Master teachings in this academy, you know that Jesus didn't come from your world. Jesus only had one life here, one physical life. He was an answer to a call sent out 70,000 years ago from the people of earth, begging a light would come to this world. He came from a galaxy that is known as the Golden Shrine Galaxy. And in that galaxy, he is the King of Kings, and he is known as Emmanuel. And he responded to the call. As he came across the universe, he stopped at the great central sun, laid down his soul, and took on a human soul to come into this world. Before coming, Jesus requested of all earth's ascended masters, of earth's angelic host, to show him everything. He even was shown how there would be a great cover-up and how a darkness would enter his church. He was shown everything. He was shown how prophets and masters would travel across Europe in the 1800s trying to reveal back the truth that this Jesus was teaching. And he saw even those plans would fail. So Jesus sent ahead of himself. He sent some of his own people. He sent several 100,000 of them. And tens of thousands of years ago, he said, if I'm to come, I want all the old races, the Aztecs, the Mayans, I want them all removed from what will be called the three Americas. Everyone has to move over to the old world or leave the planet. Of course, all requests made by this great king were all met. The lands that today are the three Americas were emptied. Even some made a very quick dash, as you've heard, such as the Mayans. With that, Jesus sent some of his own people, more than 100,000 people, to the lands that are today the three Americas. They are the indigenous peoples. They are the aboriginals. They are the North American Indian, the First Nations people. You understand that. The reason Jesus did this, he knew what would happen as a migration from the old world of peoples that would seek a freedom from tyranny. He knew that wouldn't go well, but he also knew that the hideous wars in the old worlds of Africa and Asia and Europe, the killing machines that were just every 100 years, and the bloodshed it would leave in the soils and the pressure in the consciousness of the people, if his plans to help the people of earth was to succeed, he had to have some landmass that didn't have that terrible history of war and war and war, not only in the people's consciousness, but in the earth's consciousness, in the consciousness of the powers of nature and the forces of the elements. So Jesus sent his people, and that's why I urge all of you. I urge you to free yourselves of any prejudices that you might have towards First Nations peoples, towards or Aboriginals. He didn't only send them here, he sent them to other places. Places like Sumatra, Indonesia, New Zealand, Australia. And those were the people that would look after the lands. They would look after the lands so that when those tired of tyranny would leave the old lands looking for freedom, they would come to these new lands. These new lands would be rediscovered again, Christopher Columbus and all. And the immigrants seeking greater freedom and lives would come. and those within those born into the lives of those immigrants and so forth would be those who for the last 3,000 years, all of their lifetimes, have been dedicated to awakening, dedicated to preparing for this lifetime, dedicated to prepare themselves for everything that was about to begin to occur after 2010. 2012, forgive me. And that's you. And I have to keep putting this before you, that you may break down human concepts. Is it possible? In the life that I've become, the life that I've come to live, is it possible that I could be raised to be an untouchable being? Upon the 33rd passage of resurrection, in which, and you're all in the 17th passage now, but in the 33rd passage, which is not that many years away, as an untouchable being, you have accomplished what Jesus accomplished. You have embodied your great God presence in your earthly self. You'll walk through walls. You'll silence weapons of war. You'll start healing the planet. You'll command to be a voice that speaks at the United Nations. And as the people reject you, and you're going to come by the hundreds, then you're going to come by the thousands, then you're going to come by the tens of thousands. And as you gather in cities like Vancouver and London and Moscow and Paris and New York and Los Angeles, and Buenos Aires and other places, you will put on the most spectacular light show. But that light is going to come from all of you. You'll blaze laser rays from your eyes. You will hurl spheres of light that will create beautiful canopies of sound and color. You will use no machine. You will use the magic presence of your own God spirituality. And only then, when people see what you're capable of, when people see that you are capable of stopping storms and hurricanes, when people see that you are capable of bringing people that tragically lose their body when they're young because of one of the modern day diseases such as cancer, or a young person who loses their body due to a tragic accident. And you will come, you will be called, and you will stand over their body, and you will blaze your all Christ healing presence. You will restore their physical body, and then you'll call on them, come back, come back, come back. Just like Jesus did. Lazarus. Of course, Jesus healed his body first. This is all the magnificent future. And every once in a while, we've got to touch this and revisit it. Because your future and all the demands that are made of you to live in the outer world, to work for a living, you got to be like the other people. Jesus told you how to be. Be in the world, but don't be of it. You got to separate yourself from the lower consciousness of the lower worlds. You got to go to work just like anybody else. You got families to raise, things to do. And while you're doing all of that, without too much noise and fanfare, regardless of what your best friends or best family thinks, you quietly are spiritually developing. You're studying. You're learning meditation techniques. And you're getting closer to a spiritual hierarchy just beyond the veil that has never been as close to the earth since about 13 million years as they are now. All you have removed from your minds through your studies, your growth, you have removed from your minds poisonous beliefs. You have been willing to hear us say that doubt is the nefarious stepchild of fear. You've allowed us to teach you these truths. You've sought to heal your emotional bodies, rise to have excellent minds, be responsible for your lives, be sovereign. Don't let other people control your life. We even teach you from time to time the laws of manifestation, the laws of momentum, the laws of continuity, the laws of visualization. These are active laws that every being in this universe uses daily to function and evolve. You've made so much progress. How do you measure the time it takes to go from being a human being where the tree of knowledge of good and evil is what's expressing in your mind, in yourself? How long does it take to go from there to being a citizen of Earth in which your outer self, your mind, your body, your feelings have swung wide open? They've been purified by powers from above that you've learned to call in. Your higher Christ consciousness, your Ayah Presence above you is coming closer to you. In your meditations, tremendous light is pouring down through you. And then what comes afterwards? As you keep going back into those 7 sacred moments, there comes a time in which an invisible substance begins to pour down through you. It passes through the central nerve system. It opens all the superior and the secondary electrons. It purifies and activates all the chakras. And suddenly, every point of your physical body, an electron at the center of your palm, all the chakra systems refined. Even at the center of your eye, a tiny electron in each one. Areas inside the brain, in front of the brainstem, and throughout the middle lower brain, are filled with light that have never had light before in any embodiment. Your scientific community agrees that 100 years ago, people may have experienced 12% light, 12% use of the brain. Today, scientists suggest that maybe 17% of the brain is being used. Look at the advancement in your world. In 100 years, your world has so advanced in technology and science, and even people have more heart, more conscience. And that only came about by a 5% increase in how much the brain is being used. Can you imagine if you use 99 or 100% of your brain? I can tell you, if you had access to 100% of your brain, you are a full being of light and love that knows only perfection. If required for a powerful demonstration, and with cooperation from the elemental beings, you could raise the entire mountain range. From Seymour to Grouse to, what's the next one? Cypress. The mountains that lean towards Horseshoe Bay. If you wanted to make a wonderful demonstration, you could lift that entire mountain range. Of course, to do so, you would have to cooperate. You would have to know the third activity of I am, and that's the impersonal I am. That's the fabric of life of God that's within the elements. They respond, but they only respond when you know who you are, and you have become who you are. And who you are to become threatens every church and every religion, every mosque, every temple, every church, every synagogue is threatened by whom you have come to be. You have come to once again be fully restored, to be the incarnation of God upon this earth. And there are religionists that would just go screaming bloody murder if they heard that. And you know it. But it is the truth. So God bless you, precious hearts, for just this little review. We've got to do these reviews once in a while. Keep you encouraged. Oh yes, that last point. How long does it take to become an earth human being back into a super being, back into a Christ being? Well, first of all, I don't ask that question. But I am aware that the intellect of each of you asks that question periodically. If you can grasp the mystery in this, from a human point of view, I can't give you the answer. From a cosmic spiritual truth point of view, the answer is tomorrow. Now, how long is the day between now and tomorrow going to be? Is that day going to be a year? 2 years? But this is where the clock doesn't measure. This is where your authenticity, being an authentic person, being serious about your spirituality, making the effort, and you don't have to be perfect. Just as seeing that you're authentic, you're making the effort, you're doing your best. Because he's been preparing for 2,000 years, and there's thousands of ascended masters and hundreds of millions of angels, and they're just waiting to respond. So it's not about an intellectual thing of measurement. It's about the effort that you make and how close you feel that you are coming. And so I will end this in simply saying, I encourage all of you to feel that you are so close, razor close, to expressing your God divinity and all the powers that come with it. God bless you, precious hearts. I thank you.